Hey guys, TekGeekHD here again with another video, and I'm really sorry for this long gap. There's not much I can do. I'm in school. I have so much work going on, but it's been a little over a month that the iPhone 10 has been out. Maybe more? No, it's been a little over a month. And I haven't done my actual review, my thoughts, my experience with it, and so this was sort of long overdue, and I decided that if I have a couple minutes today, let me actually try and get this video out there for you guys. So without too much further ado, here is my experience with the iPhone 10 a month later.
Count on me. Baby, you can count on me. Count on me. Baby, you can count on me.
Now, for a lot of people, the iPhone 10 has been sort of a strange phone. Apple sort of outdated the iPhone 8 with the launch of the iPhone 10, and that's sort of been a point of contention for a lot of people. But the iPhone 10 wasn't meant to be an upgrade or a replacement for the iPhone 8, rather something that was released sort of alongside it. I know that they sort of staggered the release of these phones, but the iPhone 10 really was Apple's flagship phone this year. The 8 and 8 Plus are clearly the iPhone 7 and 7S and 7S Plus. But 2017 was the 10-year anniversary of the iPhone, so Apple really had to pull out all the stops and come out with really their most revolutionary phone yet. And if you guys follow me on Medium, and I know that I've spoken about my Medium in the past and like the fact that I like to write about things, you'll probably have seen my article a weekend with the iPhone 10, a little after the iPhone 10 came out that Friday. I spent Saturday and Sunday with it, and then wrote this article out because I thought it was kind of interesting to try and recollect my thoughts and publish it out there as soon as I could, because of course making a video takes a lot longer. But I actually really truly like this phone, and now there are clearly a bunch of flaws with it. It's sort of ignorant for me to totally ignore those, but I think that those don't lie entirely in the phone itself, but sort of people's interpretation of the phone and sort of the vision for the future that Apple and the world of technology and interaction design generally has. We're really moving away from a physical interactive or a physical medium of interaction with devices, and it's really all about the software, all about the voice, all about us actually living with the technology rather than accessing it through a hardware medium. I know that this doesn't make too much sense right now, but I think the further we go along this user experience journey together, the more it will start to make sense. And the iPhone 10 is sort of an example of Apple being one of those companies that is really, sort of trying to push that boundary and really try and bring and usher in the future as quickly as possible. And often they receive a lot of backlash for doing this. I receive a ton of backlash for trying to, explain why Apple does things instead of, people call me an Apple fanboy all the time. But I really think that it's more about Apple trying to usher in the future rather than Apple purposefully trying to make things difficult for users today. Relearning the iOS interface is not easy, especially because Apple over the last 10 years has had us accustomed to a home button, something that is physical, tangible, something that people don't need to know what it does to know that there's a method of interaction and communication with the device using it. That of course doesn't exist with the iPhone 10, and so it's about relearning the operating system, relearning how to interact with the device. But once you've developed the patterns of understanding how gestures work, how certain touch controls work, how force touch works, how Face ID works, everything starts to make sense. It starts to become more of a homogeneous user experience rather than sort of a mess that people made it out to be. Let's actually start with Face ID. That's one of the big new features of the iPhone 10, and that's something that people really want to talk about. This is one of those areas where I'm in two minds. Face ID actually works extremely well for me. I really truly like Face ID, and I really see the value proposition in it versus Touch ID or versus another method of biometric verification. I do think that there are a couple inherent flaws with it simply because the way the phone is arranged, it's sort of a flat device, and so there's only so much of an angle where this sensor up here is going to be receptive to receiving a 3D map of your face. It really does need to be pointed at you to some degree to be able to make that connection. And so when a device is lying flat on a table, for example, and I often like to do this when I'm at my desk at my computer and I have my phone, I sort of just tap it with my finger and that would unlock it. The iPhone's preceding the 10, that is, because it had Touch ID, and I was into the interface. Now I sort of find myself leaning over the table and trying to look at the phone to unlock it. And of course course, this isn't maybe the best way of accomplishing something like this, but I think Apple needed to make that sacrifice to be able to help improve security. I think Apple's also pushed it to the point of security where people have been crying for privacy and security for so long that it's sort of difficult for Apple to not iterate on their biometric verification without coming across as, unintuitive or uninventive going forward in the future. And so they really had to do something. There was only so far you could take Touch ID, and there was only so fast you could get Touch ID to work. And I think that this is really a good evolution. While it does have its hiccups, there's trade-offs here and there. I can safely say that, I think it is a good upgrade. It isn't necessarily the best upgrade in the world. This isn't the one solution for all biometric and security verification purposes, but it's close. It's getting there. And one of the things you'll notice with Face ID is the fact that it actually isn't as good when you get it out of the box. One of the things that a lot of companies today are working on, Apple, Google, Facebook, Amazon, is really building a library of machine learning. And the way that they do that is by accruing a large amount of data. And of course, that happens the more and more you interact with their devices and use their services. So in the case of Google, the more you search, the more you talk to Google Home, the better it learns your voice, the better it learns some of the nuances in the way that you talk, and the more accurately it can get results for you. Touch ID and Face ID, well, more Face ID, actually work in a very similar way, where the different angles you provide to the phone of your face. So I'm looking at it sort of at like a top-down-ish angle right now, and it's done a good job of unlocking the phone pretty quickly. And this has happened over time. So the more I use Face ID, the better it recognizes the changes in my face, the better it understands the way light falls on my face, and it creates a more and more in-depth 3D map of my face. And so over time, even when I look at it at sort of obscure angles, it will unlock the phone, which is actually really, really interesting. So the more you use Face ID, the better it gets at understanding who you are, and it's easier, it actually makes it quicker for it to be able to unlock the phone. Now, another big feature of the iPhone X is, of course, the fact that there's no button anymore, and so it's all screen. I can safely say this is probably one of the best screens I've ever seen in my life. I think the one that comes closest that I get to see fairly often is that my friend Max actually has an iPhone, or rather he has a Samsung Galaxy S8 or a Note 8, one of them. It's a really, really nice display on that thing too. I think this is a little bit more accurate. I think that the colors on this are just a little bit more pleasing to the eye. That phone seems a lot more flashy because of how vibrant and saturated the display is, and at first when you look at it, it really comes across as the first impression that most people get is, whoa, look at that display. It's massively contrasty. It looks really, really beautiful. But the more you look at it, the more you look at photographs, the more you look at applications, it starts to look overly saturated, unnatural. It starts to push some of those reds. Instead of being a beautiful deep red, it makes it more of a cherry red. It starts to look very harsh to the eye. And I think that the iPhone does an amazing job of handling that display and the color calibration. I know that Samsung actually manufactures these OLED displays, but Apple does have a massive hand in calibrating and designing the way that they work, and I think they've done an amazing job of doing so. I also really like the new screen size. I think this is almost the perfect size for a phone. Now, I've been using the smaller iPhones for a while simply because I've preferred the pocketability and the manageability of actually having that size in my hand, but of course I've always really wanted this draw rather to the plus size phones because they had more screen real estate, they had a larger battery, it seemed like a beefier phone, it had better cameras. The iPhone X is really sort of a no compromise when it comes to that, where it sort of has everything available for you in this one device. It's the perfect size. It's somewhere in the middle between the iPhone 7 and 8, or rather the 8 and 8 Plus, but it's a little bit larger than the 7, closer to that size, but the screen is actually larger than that of the Plus model phone, and I actually really like it. In terms of battery life, I've actually noticed a pretty darn good improvement in this phone versus the iPhone 7 I was using before. The 7 didn't have a bad battery life, it didn't have a particularly good battery life, but the iPhone 10 has been giving me about 5.5 hours of screen on time regularly. Now, I'm not the kind of person who uses the screen at full brightness often, but with the OLED display, I actually have been doing it more and more often because it looks really nice even in daylight, and so I sort of cycle between having it at full brightness and about, slightly higher than average middle tone brightness, and I think it looks really nice. For example, right now my phone is pretty much exactly 51%, if you will, and I haven't charged the phone since the morning. It's at 92%. This is also the first iPhone that I've ever owned where I've turned Bluetooth on and never turned it off. I always have it on for things like AirDrop. I exclusively use wireless headphones and earphones now versus the iPhone 7, where for about the first couple months of ownership I used wired earphones with a dongle, and then I switched to Bluetooth, and then I would turn Bluetooth on and off as and when I was trying to use those earphones and headphones with it. But this phone has really surprised me with the battery life. I know people have had sort of mixed results with it. I think it's worked very well for me, and I'm extremely happy. Another feature of the phone that I really wanted to talk about was the camera. Now, iPhones have been known to push the envelope with the camera ever so often. Every couple generations, it really looks like we've done, or that Apple has really come out with a beautiful new camera. I think that cameras on the iPhone 10 are honestly really some of the best that I've ever used. I know that the Pixel 2 has a really good reputation for its camera, and I think it sort of comes to people's preferences. I know that in many situations that camera does take in more light. It actually deals with low light a little bit better, and so those images turn out to be more pleasing. But for me, I think it's just personally, you know, people call me an Apple fanboy all the time. I like the colors that the iPhone's camera produces. More often than not, it does a good job. The iPhone 10, if I'm being completely honest, for the first couple weeks that I was using it, or the first 2 weeks that I was using it, I thought I might have had a defective unit, because this was the slowest iPhone camera that I had in a while. It would take a weirdly long time to focus. It would take, you know, a couple seconds to process an image, and this wasn't on portrait mode. This was just on regular camera mode. But, you know, iOS 11.1.3 came along, and I think that that was probably the first time that it sort of went back to normal, where it was a quick camera and it took good photos. And then now, of course, I'm on iOS 11.2, which works well. It brings with it Apple Pay Cash and other features like that. But the camera right now is working very well for me. I truly love this camera. I will, of course, have some image samples maybe on screen right now. They were maybe on there before. It deals very well in low light. I think that that's been probably the biggest draw for me, that I can now go out in the evenings and take beautiful photos the same way that I would during the day. And I'm actually going on a trip next week, and I'm almost considering not taking my camera with me, which is the first time I've ever even thought about something in my mind as obscure as that, because this camera is really that good. The video is great. I normally don't record in 4K on my phone simply because I don't want to use up that much storage. It's sort of unusable because when I record a video, I typically want to send it to somebody or share it with someone, and those file sizes are massive. I actually don't worry too much about the storage on my phone because, of course, I got the 256 gigabyte model, and so I have a ton of storage on here, so for me it isn't a problem, but I want to share those videos with people. My mom lives in a place where there's not really great internet, so I sort of end up scaling it down to 1080p anyway. So I went back into the settings, changed it to 1080p, and it works fine for me. I know slow-mo on this is really nice. I know people really enjoy using that. It's sort of a gimmick for me because I've never found a real use for it. I think it's really nice and cool to be able to share with your friends. You know, you walk around, you see like pigeons flying away from you or something. It's kind of cool, but you know, every single test that people show is just like fountains and stuff, and I've never really found myself looking at my phone wanting to see fountains in slow-mo. Maybe that's just me. If you want to see things like that, you know, the phone is pretty good for slow-mo fountains. So, you know, you could totally do that. What else? It's a very quick phone. I've noticed that it's done, you know, I haven't really seen a lot of lagging issues. I've never seen apps load particularly weirdly. I know there's some applications such as, I actually bank with Citizens Bank, and it's sort of weird because they haven't updated the app yet, and most applications that use Touch ID were actually able to change their code to receive biometric verification to add a password just by pulling Face ID information, but some banks and other applications such as the bank that I bank with, instead of just pulling the unlock verification equals yes from Touch ID and just switching it to receive from biometric, so it receives it from anything inside of iOS, for some reason they just sort of got rid of it, and now not only do I not have some sort of indication that there was ever Touch ID, it just hasn't verified with Face ID, so I have to manually type in things. So it's some developers really just need to keep up to date with the new applications. Also, those are the same sorts of apps where, you know, if you look at IRS to Go, for example, which is the United States government IRS division that handles handling your payments and your tax returns, they still have the black bars at the top and bottom. I think this is a relatively elegant way to handle this issue, where applications that haven't been scaled up aren't really, you know, they're not bad, but when you're using it like this, it sort of just looks like you're using an iPhone, you know, 7.5 Plus or something like that, where because it's an OLED screen, it actually blacks out the top and bottom, so it really, the screen is off in those parts, and so it does look, you know, relatively pleasing. Outside of that, I don't know if I have very much else to say. I know that as part of this screen, another thing that I really love is True Tone, and again, I wrote a lot about this in I actually wrote a Medium piece called Why the iPhone 8 is actually a really great phone. I'll link that in the description if you guys want to take a look at it. I truly love True Tone. I haven't turned it off from the day that I got the phone. I turned it off maybe yesterday or day before just to see what it was like, and the blue light almost was jarring to the eye. I couldn't look at it. True Tone is beautiful. It adjusts very, very naturally. You never know. The best technology, innovation, and design is when you don't know that it's happening. It sort of fades into the background. It just makes your life better. And really, True Tone is one of the amazing examples of something like that. And so really, guys, that kind of is all I have to say about the phone. Outside of, some of those things that I was talking about, the phone is built very well. It's stainless steel and glass. It has wireless charging. These are things everybody sort of knows about. Wireless charging works well. iOS 11.2 allows 7.5 watt wireless charging, so it actually charges pretty quickly, which is nice. The phone feels dense and heavy in the hand. It feels really premium, and I truly, truly love that. I think the iPhone 7 felt a little bit cheap in the hand. This feels great. Apple has really mastered the art of making something feel precious in the hand. And this phone is no exception. If you break the screen, it's $279 plus tax. If you break the back, it's $550 plus tax. So get Apple Care. I did that. With Apple Care, it's $30 to fix the screen, $90 to replace the phone, pretty much, if you break the back. And that's definitely an investment that's worth it. I would not have bought this phone if I didn't get it with Apple Care, because I couldn't afford to replace the front and back. I'm normally pretty careful with my phones. I have a screen protector, a glass screen protector on the front of my phone. 99% of the time, this phone is inside of the Apple Blue silicone case. I really like that case. I've Instagrammed it to death, but that's sort of the way that I use my phone. When I'm at home, I like to take the case off because I know I have a carpeted floor, and even if I drop it, worst case, I'm not really gonna break it. So yeah, I really love the iPhone 10. Let me know what you guys think. If you guys have any other ideas for videos you'd like to see with the iPhone 10, let me know. I put out some of my, the applications that I use on my phone a little while ago, so I hope you guys enjoyed that video. Either way, that about does it for this video. If I missed anything, I'm sorry. These are just sort of my thoughts. This is my experience with the phone after a month of using it. I love it. And yeah, that's about it. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll catch you all in the next one. Peace.